Why should we care about the rare breeds of horses that are at risk of extinction? And why are there so many breeds of horses that are at risk of being lost forever? Welcome to Curious Equestrian. I'm Anna Louise, your host, and in this podcast we delve deep into all sorts of equestrian conversations with brilliant guests, experts in their field, equine professionals, well-known names and horse owners like you or I. In this episode, we're talking to Tracy Wathen-Jones, a conservation expert at the Rare Breed Survival Trust, to delve deep and talk about the rare pools of genetics, how difficult it is to keep certain breeds going, the rare horses that are at risk, that are on the watch list, like the magnificent Dales pony, the very beautiful Eriskay Island pony, the Suffolk Punch horse that is majestic and strong and actually quite beast-like, the Exmoor pony, and lots of other horse breeds at risk, like the ginormous Shire horse that is absolutely magnificent to watch in action if you've ever seen them move. We're going to be talking all about the struggles and what we can do to help protect these horses and ponies. If you enjoy this episode, please share, give us a like and subscribe so that we can keep bringing you these awesome guests. It really helps our podcast to be seen and to spread the word. Let's dive in with Tracy, shall we? Tracy, welcome to Curious Equestrian.
Thank you, really pleased to be here.
Tracy, why are there so many breeds of horses at risk of being lost forever?
It's not a simple answer in that it is quite complex depending on the breed. Our native breed equines were bred and developed locally, so hence why some of their names are associated with the areas that they come from originally. So for various reasons, but predominantly going back, they had a purpose, they had a job to do in life. So whether it was with the heavy horses and agriculture, or some of the smaller ponies, it might have been carrying things for people, it might have been other types of work that they were developed for. And unfortunately, a lot of that work has ceased being done and we don't need them for those purposes anymore. So although some of the breeds have been very successful at repurposing their sort of need for people, others unfortunately haven't. And so I think that's probably predominantly the main reason that some of them have been in trouble over the last sort of few decades.
And just thinking about those jobs, horses were a part of the community, weren't they? They were part of people's families, livelihoods, and actually the weekly schedule of productivity and money earning actually largely depended on horses, didn't it? Whether they were working the farm or helping with carry heavy loads, operating carts. What sort of jobs can you run us through, Tracy, were horses responsible for?
Yeah, so if you take the sort of heavy horses, they were very much the pulling carts, the pulling ploughs, the actual sort of back when mechanisation was very minimal, but we still used tools on the land. They would have been very much for that and carrying heavy loads. And then some of the smaller ponies, the things like up in the sort of Scottish Islands, collecting seaweed, even carrying, for the family, like you say, very much part of the family. So, baskets on either side and carrying things, shopping and goods that, before people had cars and vehicles and, could just throw everything in their boot. They were very much associated with that type of work, even sort of milling and things like that, turning millstones, everything really before sort of the days of tractors were pretty much done by oxen and horses. And even if you look up in places like Scotland, things like stag hunting and carrying, the the sort of stags that have been culled, they would have carried them back to the main house. So food gathering, shopping, all sorts of jobs that were associated with family life, agricultural life across the country were predominantly done by our breeds of equine.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I was walking up and down the high street the other day and watching how the dogs on leads were interacting with shoppers, and families were stopping and couples were stopping, and everyone sort of talking to the dog. And I thought, wow, one day, in history, days gone by, that would have been horses.
Yes.
That would have been passing by in the high street, pulling the carts or walking up and down, carrying for families, and people greeting horses and waving to each other. And now they're very much removed from society, aren't they?
I mean, I lived in Ireland for 8.5 years, and in the Republic of Ireland, I was in County Cork, which is very near County Kerry. So we used to spend a lot of time around Killarney, and still now, Killarney, if you visit there, the town centre is full of horses pulling carts for the tourists.
Wow.
And it's still very much a part of, sort of everyday life for people in Killarney and the surrounding areas. They very much do still use that as a traditional sort of day out for tourists. And so, it is quite a unique experience when you still go to other parts of the world as well. And, you go into sort of urban places and there are equines, horses and ponies around, and we've got very much detached from that here in this country. And so yes, I think generally people would have had a lot more contact on a daily basis with our horses and ponies. And unless you're very much into your sort of horse riding and sports, then most people won't come across horses and ponies anymore.
Do you think that's part of the problem, Tracy, that not only have horses lost their jobs in society, but actually people now, you're either part of the equestrian community as a horse rider or horse owner, or you're not part of that world at all, and actually people are so removed from horses?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's generally very much a generalisation, but I find that there's a lot more fear around horses and ponies, perhaps than there would have been years ago. And purely because people don't come across them. The only caveat I would say to that is the sort of whole world of equine therapy that is very much opening up in a big way and has done for sort of the last few years. And I think that will, as it grows, which I'm sure it will, overcome some of that, because, if people have been to sort of spend time with horses and ponies, as therapy, then I'm sure that's going to break down that fear, and it's going to give a lot of our breeds, a new lease of life. And, some of our sort of native breeds, especially the sort of smaller ponies, are going to be very well suited to that.
And that's such an interesting thought. So equine therapy, what other jobs could these rare and at-risk horses and ponies do in modern day society, do you think?
Yeah, so with some of the heavy breeds, very much conservation, not just grazing, but things like bracken control, logging. So, quite a lot of our heavy breeds have been utilised in recent years for low impact logging. So instead of sending in tracked machinery, it's a very sort of more gentle way of extracting timber from woodland, especially sort of some of our more sensitive woodland. So that's been a big boost for some of our heavier breeds. And then in terms of conservation grazing, like our Dartmoors and Exmoors and some of the what you'd class as more semi-feral breeds have done an excellent job and are very popular now in conservation grazing. And then of course you have, there is the whole world with the sort of riding and driving that, people have looked back to some of our native breeds, I think just for passion and interest as well, really.
Because, of course, they contain, and their stories contain so much history, don't they? The horses of the past tell our human stories of the past.
Absolutely. Definitely there's a strong element of heritage, and you often find that people that are keeping and breeding our native breeds are incredibly passionate people. You know, they are committed, and, you know, they spend a lot of their own resources and time and on promoting these breeds and making sure that they do continue into the future. So I think individual sort of people's passion is a big driver of this as well.
And actually, in small communities, although these horses may be at risk, like you say, the passion there for the breed is like a cult following, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think, like you sort of rightly said earlier, your view can be a bit skewed, I think, in terms of if you're from an area, like you say, that's got a really strong following for a local breed, then you might be forgiven for sort of thinking it's all okay. But that's quite skewed in terms of when you look at the numbers, you know, at a national level, it doesn't sort of represent it in a true way. So, you know, if you're in the sort of culture of that particular breed and you're very involved in it and you go to the shows, and, you know, it's quite easy to go to our sort of agricultural shows and go, oh, look, you know, there's classes of them. But that is it. That is sort of the representation of the breed. And when you look at national numbers, it's more worrying.
That's so important you mentioned that. I'm from Kent, but recently moved to Suffolk, and I've seen many a Suffolk punch, even though they are on the rare list. So I feel very fortunate that I've been able to be up close and personal with Suffolk punches that are in fact down the road from my house, and have been able to interact with them and see their sheer size and power, and actually how they're so very different from so many horses that I've been around my whole life, and have witnessed that cult passion following for the Suffolk punch horse in all sorts of different communities, not even just the older generation who have actually shared stories of when they saw the Suffolk punches ploughing the field, but the new generations coming up. And Jimmy's farm, you know, very well-known TV figure, Jimmy showed me around his Suffolk punches and what they're doing for his farm, and how the new generations of enthusiasts are coming up through. How important is that, Tracy, that actually it's not just the communities that remember these horses in situ, that it's the new generations coming up that find that same passion?
Absolutely, very critical, and it's something that, you know, at RBST we work a lot on, is this trying to, you know, engage with younger people and find where they're at and what they're interested in. And I think it's interesting to know that not just the breeds that are rare, but the skills that go with them. So the skills of keeping some of these breeds, the skills of breeding them, the skills of working them. It's not enough to just keep the breed alive. I think we've got to keep those skills alive as well. And the only way we're going to do that is to engage with young people and bring them along with us and get them interested in taking this forward. Because otherwise, you know, with the older generation, you know, if those skills die with them, then we are still going to be in trouble with these breeds. So they very much go hand in hand.
And what sort of communities and organisations do you work with, Tracy, to make sure these breeds are used in different areas throughout the country and for different projects?
Yeah, so at RBST we get involved with the breed societies a lot. So we would be, you know, in close connection with them. We work a lot with universities because there's been quite a lot of interest in recent years of universities carrying out research. So we would definitely be talking to academics, and if papers come out, we would be engaging at that level as well. We teach Lantra conservation grazing courses. So we get a good percentage of young people on those courses that are involved in conservation and from an ecology background. So they very much got an ecology background but might not have livestock background, and they want to get involved in conservation grazing, and that very much includes our equines. So on those courses we find that's a really good way to engage with a sort of wide audience and get people on board with that. And then, you know, just generally through our membership, because we're a membership organisation, then, you know, through our newsletters and our quarterly art magazine, we would always be, you know, including sort of equine stories in that to try and get people interested in and connected. You know, it's as much about connecting people together, I think, as us sort of just putting out information.
There is something wonderfully magical about connecting with the breed and their story and thinking about our history, isn't there? And it's almost transporting and taking us back in time.
Definitely. And, you know, we have a series of farm parks around the country as well. And, you know, some are affiliated to us, some aren't, but there are lots of sort of visitor attractions out there that people, if they literally just are interested, they don't know much about it, but certainly recommend sort of looking up your local farm park and seeing, you know, what breeds of equine they've got there and see what they've got on. Because I know some of them do some amazing events and they still do the sort of demonstrations of the horses working. And, you know, it's just a really great way for people who don't know much about it to just, especially children, to start engaging children and showing them that you know, this is still happening and it's still, you know, there are people out there still working these horses.
And just share with us, Tracy, some of the numbers of the horses that are at risk. We're not talking about thousands of horses being left. We're talking hundreds. Yeah,
so we produce a watch list every year, and basically we get numbers from DEFRA, and then we changed our methodology a few years ago because we wanted to give a more true picture. So we don't just look at females and males, dams and sires, but we look at something called effective population size. So when we class things as being at risk, it's not just literally the numbers, but we look at their effective population and we look at their inbreeding levels. So it's more sort of complicated than it used to be, because rather than just saying, oh, under 500 is at risk, if you've got a population that's got high inbreeding, then that is at more risk than another population that has similar numbers but lower inbreeding rates. So from that point of view, we also take into account things like number of breeders and the geographical concentration of the breed. So like you've said yourself, you live in Suffolk, you've got Suffolk sort of surrounding you, but you go to other parts of the country, you probably won't see a Suffolk horse. So all those things are taken into account when we come up with our watch list. But there's also numbers, so anyone that's listening to this can go on to sort of the DEFRA website, and there's a lot of figures on there for people to just look at themselves. But from 2020 to 2024, they do what they call a sort of 5-year percentage change for the breeds. So you can see overall, so for example, Dale's pony is up 5%. The Suffolk that we've been talking about is actually up 4% over the 2020 to 24. But then you've got other things. I know you mentioned in your email to me about the Eriskay breed, which was mentioned in the Times the other day. They're actually, their overall pattern is down 10%. Exmoor ponies down 11%. So there's quite a difference in there as to what's up and what's down. And that's why we do our watch list every year, because we very much can't take our eye off the ball. We very much have to be aware year on year as to the trends of these breeds. So that's basically sort of what the work we're doing in the background all the time.
And when you get these trends, Tracy, are you then going to pass that information on to try and encourage certain organisations or communities or areas of the UK to actually start increasing their breeding? Do you sort of put out an announcement, we need help with this certain breed?
So what we do is it always goes out when the watch list comes out. There's always we've got very good media coverage this year, and we do most years. And then what we'll do is, particularly if we see a trend of and not a good trend, not going in a good way, we will of course contact the Breed Society before we put the numbers out into public domain. So we will be talking to them in the background and just saying, look, we've had a look at our figures this year. This is what's happening with the watch list. Your breed is going from at risk to priority or off native to at risk. And we'll have conversations with them before it goes into the public domain and just say, look, you know, what can we do to help? What can we do for the coming year? How can we work together on this? And, you know, very much have those conversations before that comes out.
And talk to us about the breeding, Tracy, because of course it's all about getting those numbers every year and foals on the ground, but that must be an incredible challenge. How do you go about breeding and breeding programs successfully with a limited gene pool?
Yeah, so obviously, as you say, that the smaller the gene pool, the more issues you've got. And what has happened over time with some of the breeds is there's been very popular stallions. So people have tended to go for the popular stallion, and then you suddenly find, and it's a bit of a lag time, you suddenly find that, oh, everybody's using that stallion. That's not actually good. We've got a database, it's not ours, but there is a database called Grassroots, which the herd and flock books use. And so that's very much monitoring numbers. We can do checks on that, so we can do kinship and we can look at the relatedness of males to females. So we can check whether matings are sort of red, amber or green. So, you know, your red ones you really want to be avoiding because they're closely related. Your amber, you want to manage those matings. So, you know, in certain circumstances it might be okay, but you very much want to monitor it. And then if you're in your green, then it's, brilliant. You know, that's a good mating. So, you know, go with that. So there's also things around just general health of your, you know, mares and, you know, your dam sires and foals. So, you know, we do also do quite a lot of work and publicising general sort of health and welfare, because if you don't have a healthy animal, you're not going to breed well from it. So it goes right back to the sort of basics with that as well. And then the next thing on from that is registering your stock. So we've got a big, we've had this summer a big campaign again about registering stock, because unfortunately people, if they're not registering their pedigree stock, we don't have clear figures of actually the true picture of how many animals are out there on the ground, which means that when we're doing background work with, say, DEFRA and government policy and breed societies, if we don't have that true picture, it makes it much harder for us to do our job and give the sort of solid facts. And also, if there are things like disease outbreaks, we need the true picture. And if your animals are registered, then you've got evidence of those animals and their bloodlines, which means we can help in, you know, in the worst case scenarios, we might be able to support people and say, look, we've got all this data. They've been registered. We can see their bloodlines. This is a particularly rare bloodline that we really need to conserve. So yeah, registering stock is another aspect that we are working a lot on, and it's not easy, but it's a case of, you know, educating and talking about it. And when we go to shows and events, just, you know, having conversations with people and trying to get them to see that in actual fact, you know, to keep that heritage and to keep that information and to keep it up to date, then we do need people to be registering stock.
And we've lost horse breeds before that have become officially extinct. Is there anything, Tracy, that's in place that if the numbers are dwindling so much and decreasing so much, that there's something to stop these rare breeds that are on the list actually becoming extinct? Yeah,
I mean, we always say that we prefer animals in the field, but we do have our national gene bank, which is basically our insurance policy. So for horses, it's semen storage, but we so alongside our sort of work to keep these breeds alive and to keep engaging with people and to make sure that they're being utilised and kept, our gene bank is there in order for worst case scenario, we still have that genetic resource stored for if we needed to, work on bringing back a breed in worst case scenario. So that's another big part of our work, is our gene bank, and making sure that we have, healthy sort of storage of in our gene bank, and that we make sure that collections from stallions are sort of kept up to date. And if we think there's a gap, and people can come to us as well and say, that they'd like their stallion semen to be stored in our gene bank. So it works both ways. We can go to people come to us, but that's very much our insurance policy for worst case scenarios.
Wow. And can that storage last for decades? Is there a limit to the samples and how long they last?
We do have samples from 60s, 70s. The thing is, you can test, how viable that is at a later date. But you have to decide then about, so in terms of how many straws we have saved, there are decisions to make about how many are for sale, how many are for conservation. And then if you want to test the viability, then obviously you are not wasting, it's the wrong term, but you are having to use some of those straws to test their viability. So, that's why we very much have to manage that side of things and make sure that we, going forward, don't just sort of say, right, we've collected 25 stallions and therefore that's done there. Going forward, we have to decide at what point we then use some of the straws to test the viability from the older semen that's in storage, and then whether we want to collect again from newer stallions going forward. So it's very much a sort of year by year. We have to manage that as well.
Wow. So you can create a foal where the sample has been in storage for around 60 years, potentially.
Yeah. The viability does tend to drop, so it's not an exact science, but definitely it is there and it has been done. But obviously, the longer it is in storage, the viability does decrease with it. So hence why we need to always make sure we're sort of keeping up to date going forward as well.
Because, of course, the actual breeding itself is a tough one, isn't it? Getting the mare pregnant and keeping the pregnancy, as well as actually maintaining the pregnancy through to actually getting the foal on the ground and seeing the foal thrive and survive. Do you work with breeders in terms of helping them through that process, which I know can be incredibly traumatic, even for the humans involved, if pregnancy after pregnancy is unviable or lost?
Yeah. So, I mean, we wouldn't tend to be, we would always say in terms of sort of that side of things is, for people to have really good relationships with their vets, especially if you have got a particular breed of equine and it's quite specialist case. And, we always recommend people to have a really good relationship with an equine vet that understands the breed and the sort of, the delicacies of trying to breed some of these more rare horses and ponies. But in terms of, we do projects and we do quite a lot of survey work. So we've done some survey work last year and this year that we're now putting together, and we're going to be publicising results next year. So we do quite a lot of survey work of breeders to find out, to try and get a good picture of their issues, so they can feed back to us what their particular issues are, whether it is getting the mare in foal, whether it's finding the right stallion, whether it's once the foal is on the ground, the health problems they might have with the foals. So that very much, because we're a small organisation with quite a small team, it would be, very difficult for us to go and visit all the breeders, but by doing these sort of survey work, we can gather lots of information from lots of breeders, and then we can see for commonalities. So, if we get all this information from a lot of Suffolk breeders and they're all coming back to us and saying, look, got no problem getting the mare in foal, but actually, week 3 of the foal's life, we're all coming across a common problem, then we will very much then sort of put our resources into that and look at that in more detail, and then we can actually do further work where the breeders need us to, rather than us sort of visiting everyone. So that's kind of how we go about it, is finding these common issues, and therefore that's sort of the best use of our resources, and we can help with those common issues.
What currently, Tracy, is the most rare horse breed in the UK?
Well, you mentioned the Eriskay. That is a very small population, and there's been a lot of work in recent years with universities, because it is quite a unique breed and very rare and very low numbers. Then it has had a lot of interest amongst sort of geneticists and academics. So I think that has helped that breed in terms of really understanding where it's at and what the current situation is of it. We've got a very passionate trustee who's very involved with the Eriskay breed and breeds them himself. And so that's been really, really, really helpful for us as an organisation in helping that breed. But that one is particularly unique and particularly small population, and that does bring with it its problems, like you've said, in terms of small population to be sort of breeding from. So in terms of bringing in fresh genetics, it makes it very hard. So the breeding of those has to be very carefully managed and very carefully watched.
What makes them so unique? You mentioned a few times how particularly unique they are.
Yeah, I think it's just because because of where they're from, and Scottish Islands, with sort of their cattle and sheep breeds as well, obviously developed, we talk about sort of county level breeds in sort of England particularly. But these islands were so unique in that, back before transport was as easy as it is now, they were literally in a bubble, and there was very little merging of genetics. They were very much suited to their very particular environment. So they were, bred and developed, absolutely in connection with that environment where they're from. And so that makes them unique in that they have a sort of narrow genetics in terms of there's not much sort of coming in from elsewhere in the world, whereas even our sort of county-wide breeds, it quite quickly sort of changed in that there were, animals and genetics coming in from all over the world. So some of those were very quickly diluted, whereas these Scottish Island breeds, that didn't really happen so much. So it makes it, a really good case study to see how these breeds developed in a bubble, really.
Wow.
And I think that's why geneticists really like working with them, and it makes their sort of research really interesting.
So how thrilled were you as a trust when little Sullie, the filly foal, hit the headlines weeks ago, nationally, across the whole country, articles, coverage, TV, radio?
Yeah.
What did that mean for you and for the breed?
Yeah, I mean, it's super lovely when, the nationals pick up on that sort of story, because again, the sort of rare breed world can feel a bit like a bubble in itself, and you sort of work away in this bubble of passionate people that are all very interested in what they do. But it can be quite hard sometimes to break out of that bubble and get, national interest and get people outside the rare breed bubble to be interested. So, absolutely fantastic for us, and, to see that in the national news, and for people to be interested in it, and for people to take the time to just read, even if it is just a short article, and just for awareness. In terms of that particular breed, I'm not sure it will, necessarily sort of lead to sort of loads more foals on the ground. But in terms of just bringing awareness to the national sort of press and the national public that this is going on behind the scenes and these things are happening, and it would be lovely if people did just take the time to sort of think twice about what is happening with our native breeds. And also then perhaps, you know, like I said earlier, go to one of your local sort of farm parks and find out a bit more about them would be, you know, just a step in the right direction, really. And then, you know, raising awareness of RBST and whether people would like to get more involved with us.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's quite difficult to get equestrian stories in the national press. It's usually in the sport category, or, you know, when the Olympics comes round, or when we've got any of our big equestrian competitions, that then the world starts speaking about it a bit more. What was it about Sullie that captured the imaginations of not only the national public actually clicking on the article, but actually the broadcasters who chose to run that article? Why do you think it was that story?
Yeah, it is. It's not always easy to pinpoint as to why, because we do get quite good press coverage for various things. And we do get sort of a lot of, we get a lot of articles in the farming press, and we do get letters, in sort of the national newspapers. I think for that, I mean, they're gorgeous looking. I mean, you know, it does come down, I think, to, people do love really nice pictures and just very cute foal. And, you know, a lot of the time. I was going to say, is it because it's cute and fluffy? Just come down. Yeah, it just comes down to people. And I think there's so much bad news and so much, you know, at the moment in the press. And I think, you know, the one, you know, particularly the Times, I didn't realise it was going to be in there, to be honest. And, you know, opening the Times and just, you know, it was a big picture. It wasn't, you know, tiny. And I just think people love a good news story. I think that's it, you know, cute picture, beautiful foal, good news story. And I think people just, you know, really enjoyed it for that.
It was wonderful to see, because as you say, you know, there are certain audiences that will pick up on these stories: equestrian, sports, farming, magazines and articles and sort of establishments might publish these kind of stories, as you say, letters. But to get national headlines is something else, isn't it? Large photos, front page spreads, front of the BBC news page is that sort of coverage that you just can't buy and you just can't orchestrate. And I love that the national population cared as well, which is why I've got to ask you, Tracy, why should we all care, whether we're equestrians or not, about the horses we could potentially lose?
Yeah, I think it is very much, as we've sort of touched on, that it's a big part of our heritage and our history. And I think anyone who enjoys walking in the countryside, or, you know, just has any sort of connection at all to, you know, going out on a Sunday into the countryside. Our countryside and our agriculture were very much built on the back of our horses and ponies and oxen and our, you know, breeds of livestock. And, you know, it's difficult to say for sure, but I don't think our countryside would be like it is, you know, without that in our history. And as we said, you know, years ago, our grandparents, great-grandparents would have probably all had horses in their lives for one reason or another. And it's just that that's, you know, gone by the wayside as generations have passed. But so, you know, anyone that's interested, has any interest in the countryside or rural life, history of any sort, and our culture and where we've come from, I think, you know, delving into looking at our native breed horses and ponies is a really lovely way to connect back to that.
And showcasing what some of these breeds can do. I mean, the sheer strength that we've mentioned of the Suffolk Punch and the Shire. I was actually shocked to hear of the risk that the Shire is facing. Can you talk us through that, Tracy? Why are the Shires affected? Because there's such a... When you think of Great Britain, you often think of the Shire horse, don't you? I know I certainly do. Why are they so at risk?
Yeah, I mean, very much hand in hand with the way agriculture has changed. You know, they had a place, they had a job. A lot of them helped in the war, particularly World War I. A lot were lost there. And just over time, they're big horses. Again, going back to the skills, if you're not used to being around and dealing with an animal that size, that's a whole new skill set. And it's something that, you know, I very much think the young people that, you know, are going into keeping and breeding shires have probably had some connection to them through parents, grandparents, you know, historically, and have been used to them. So I think it's as much about that they're big animals to feed, you know, they're big animals to stable or you know, have paddock room for. So even those sort of practical constraints can affect them. So in terms of that, it's, you know, people have got to be quite dedicated and passionate about them to want to have them in their lives, I guess. So, you know, in terms of the practicalities, it's people that really want to make sure that this breed survives. There's been people that have taken to riding them and using them for new areas of equine sport. So that's a growth area. It's not, I'd say there's a bit of a split between people that think that's okay and people that don't. So that can cause issues. You know, there are people that think, well, we need a use for these animals in order for people to keep them. And then some sort of more traditional people aren't on board with that and sort of don't think it's right because it has slightly changed the focus of the breeding. So you probably want to breed a slightly different animal for riding than you do for working in the fields. So the traits have altered slightly, and I think that's where people are coming from in terms of not being totally on board with it. So you do have to watch things like that with the breed. There's also been for the Shire, there's been some really popular stallions, and people have used sort of popular stallions a lot, so that leads to you know, some inbreeding. There's been quite a lot of export of Shires to other parts of the world because they're quite popular in the States, for example. So that sort of led to some of the animals going out of the UK. But I think on the whole, it's about finding new ways of utilising the breed and, you know, helping people that want to get into it to connect with people who are very experienced in keeping shires, and that way young people with an interest can go into keeping them with confidence. I wouldn't want young people that are interested to just go and buy a shire and think that it's just, you know, any old sort of horse. I think you do need, you know, that sort of background and experience and somebody to perhaps mentor you or help you along the way with keeping something like shires.
And Suffolk punches, of course.
And the punch.
Yeah, and the punch too, because thinking of that, and that's a really interesting point of view, is that all horses are a huge commitment, a huge undertaking, a learning curve. You have to have knowledge to take on a horse in whatever way that may be, as a ridden partner, as a companion, as a pet simply, or whether your horse will have a job when you take it on. But of course, with these larger breeds, there is a level of danger. I've seen the Suffolk punch in action, and they can be very bolshy and forthright. They have a lot of weight behind them. They are hugely robust, aren't they? And any horse that knocks you flying or walks through you is dangerous. But you can imagine that on a greater scale with the Suffolk punch and the Shire.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a particular skill in, at the end of the day, you know, a mere human is never going to stop an animal that size. So it's all about how you train them, how you manage them. And these are sort of the tips and, you know, that sort of people that have kept them before will be able to pass on to newbies, really. I think it is and it's about the breeding as well in terms of temperament. You know, it's okay for more experienced people if they want, you know, a Suffolk horse that's slightly more bolshy. But if you are a newbie and you want to get into that breed, you know, I would definitely recommend looking at the sort of breeding and temperament of an animal that you want to get. And it might be that, you know, breeders sort of don't want to breed from some animals that are particularly bad-tempered or bolshy, because they are, huge animals. And so we expect our heavy horses to be well-mannered and, to be led, and, so very much comes into the sort of training aspect of it as well from when they're young.
Now, bear with us, Tracy. I'm going to go and pull the curtains because the light has changed. And I want to finish our interview without having a bright light in my face. So hold the line for 1 second. There we go, in complete darkness now, with only false light. Now we've got only the light that we can actually guarantee. I love the sun, I'm not moaning, I promise. Brilliant. Right, let me settle down so I'm not wriggling and fidgeting. There we go. That's frustrating. But that will be better, we don't want to end it with me squinting. There we go. Right, hang on, let me have a look. Yeah. And to use sullie that we've been talking about, Tracy, what difference and impact will she make? Obviously, she's brought a lot of attention, a lot of eyes to the story through hitting the national headlines, which is fantastic. But what impact will she have genetically as one of actually only 400 Eriskay ponies left?
Yeah, I mean, I think the importance is that every sort of live foal on the ground is a bonus for a breed which is in such small numbers. So, each live foal that gets to each life stage is a massive bonus to a small population like that. So therefore, she might not change the entire sort of trajectory of the breed, but every single time there's a live foal that is healthy and, has the possibility to be bred from in the future is, a big bonus. And everyone that's born does make a big difference, because that gradually increases the, population from which we can breed from. So it does make a difference. And I suppose that is the message, to anyone who is the owner of any of our rare breeds, is the importance of, if you can breed, then, get the right advice, talk to your breed society, talk to us, look at, levels of inbreeding, and, carefully choose your sire. And then, work, like I said earlier, work closely with a good equine vet to make sure that, mare has a healthy pregnancy, and foal is, there's a healthy birth and a lovely healthy foal on the ground, really, would be sort of my advice.
And Tracy, what will be the catalyst to turn it around for these rare breeds? We've talked about using them for conservation, giving them other jobs. But I know that many breeds come in and out of fashion, quote unquote. How do we actually not only save them from the brink, but bring them back into safe numbers? What will do that, do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, you rightly say about conservation grazing has been a big game changer for equines in the last few years. And I think that is going to grow. I think that will expand even further. I think there are more people interested in sustainable agriculture, and I think there are more and more people looking at alternatives. I'm not for a minute suggesting that every farm is about to go back to pulling a plough with, a Shire or Suffolk, but I think there are more and more people interested in taking parts of their farm out of intensive agriculture and looking at alternative ways to utilise with marginal land where they don't want to put a tractor. There's more interest in heavy horses working the land for them. And with that come people who want to start a business around that. So we're seeing more and more businesses coming on board that are rather than having a farm, they're offering conservation grazing to other organisations with all sorts of species. And then there are other businesses where people are offering this alternative method of cultivating marginal land using heavy horses. So I think as time progresses and agriculture changes, I think we will see more and more people wanting to do these aspects as standalone businesses. And I'm hoping that that will mean that there will be more interest in our native breeds and utilising them that way. It might not be the catalyst that you're talking about, but I think it will grow. And I think it's like everything. Once people start doing something and there's interest in it, a community builds around that, and then that community spreads to different parts of the country. And then I think it's more like a slow growth over time, but it's making sure that that growth is going in the right direction.
And of course, it ticks so many boxes, doesn't it? Because not only is it helping the horses, but also the planet and the landscape and the grazing and the planet and the wildlife that share that landscape.
Absolutely. So, I mentioned logging earlier. If you're in an ancient woodland, and you need to say extract some coppice or some timber, you can imagine the impact it has, not just with having machinery, the impact on the ground, but the noise, the disturbance. Whereas if you've got horses working, it's just a completely different feeling in the wood. It's peaceful. There's not nearly the disturbance to the wildlife. And it's just, I think for the person working the horses, people I've spoken to that do that as a job, I'm quite jealous. I think it's, I think it's a fantastic way of life. And for people that are dedicated to it, I think is absolutely amazing. So it's about that. It's about that whole sustainability picture. It's like I say, we're not about to replace tractors, I don't think, with heavy horses again. But I think if we support those that are passionate about these breeds to do this type of work, and it's good for rural industry as well. If there are more and more people wanting to set up standalone businesses using these breeds, then, that's good for rural life as well.
And we've got an awful lot of making up to do with our planet, haven't we, and conservation and doing good and trying to go back to sort of traditional regenerative methods as well, to go more lightly on the land, which is what you're talking about, and how lovely that horses can play a part in that. And actually there's that room for growth if more and more people take on this way of life. And we've had on the podcast before Hitchin Farm horses. I don't know if you've seen what they do, Tracy. If you haven't seen their YouTube channel, you'd love it. We had them on and they talked all about their logging, and to see their stallions, and they have great big heavy horses. For those who are listening and watching that haven't seen it, do go back, scroll and have a look at the previous episode that we did with Hitchin Farm horses. And wow, to see those stallions working the land, heaving those logs up great hills through ditches, leaping often at times through the trees, and their agility and how they can weave through the land instead of tractors getting stuck or, churning up the mud, all of that. You can just imagine the sort of horror stories that must have happened when trying to use a tractor in that scenario. But how the horses just are so, despite being heavily built, are so light through the land and on their hooves. Just incredible. So hopefully we see lots more of that at play. And I wanted to have a look at some of the horses that we sadly have lost over the years, and just thinking that I don't even know, Tracy, some of these names. The Galloway pony from Scotland, excuse my pronunciation, but the Narragansett pacer from the US, the Norfolk trotter, the Old English black, the Turcoman horse, the Fagana horse, the Harrington Hippus horse, the Irish hobby horse. Wow, what a name. The Tarpan, which is a Eurasian wild horse, the Abaco barb horse, the Berrichon horse, the American zebra, the Neapolitan horse, the quagga, some great names as well, and the Syrian wild ass as well. And you just think most of these In fact, all of these I've never heard of before. And the only things that I know are the place names. And how sad that these horses have completely disappeared and will never be seen again. What difference will it make, Tracy, if the horses on the rare list now and the at-risk list now were to disappear in decades' time?
I think it's about, we talk a lot in recent times about biodiversity. And I think when people think of biodiversity, they think of our butterflies and our botany and our plants and our birds. And I think that's everyone's natural reaction. But people often forget that biodiversity is our livestock. It's our livestock breeds. And so we don't know what the future holds in terms of climate change, in terms of agriculture, and all aspects of our life, really. We don't have a crystal ball, so we don't know what we're going to need in the future. And our livestock breeds, including our equines, are very much a part of our biodiversity. So I think when people are having conversations around biodiversity and naturally think of wildlife, it's really useful if people can start thinking about our livestock breeds as part of that as well, and start having the conversations around that. Because, like I say, we don't know what we're going to need. We don't know what genetics we're going to need in the future. We don't know what we're going to need help with. And so that's why it's going to be really vitally important that over the next, I'd say, sort of 30, 40 years, we ensure that we don't lose any more of our breeds, which is exactly sort of the role of RBST to work behind the scenes to make sure that doesn't happen.
Oh, well, Tracy, thank you so much for coming on Curious Equestrian. It's been so inspiring. For those listening who are thinking, I can't own a Shire horse, I can't own a Suffolk Punch, I'm up to my ears in horses already, or I just don't have the skills. Yeah. What can we do? You've mentioned your brilliant work at the Trust. What can the average horse lover do to help make a great impact to save some of these breeds?
Yeah, I think it is about, as I said earlier, the breed societies. If you've got a particular interest in a particular breed, then check out the website of the breed society to do with that breed. You know, you might just want to join them and get their sort of information and newsletter and keep up to date with it. It can be as simple as that. And you're supporting the breed society then, who are doing the work, you know, alongside us. Just having conversations, you know, like this today, you know, when you're chatting to sort of your friends, you know, at the riding stables or, you know, the livery yard or wherever, you know, just chat to people about what they know about the native breeds and have they ever kept them and what do they know about them, and just start the conversations. And from my point of view, I'm doing a project next year on conservation grazing with equine. So I want to expand our knowledge base on what people are doing on the ground, what breeds they're using, how they're utilising them. So if anyone that's listening that is involved with native breeds and conservation grazing, then, you know, we'd love to hear from them. But just, I think, have the conversations. It means that our breeds are being talked about. It means if you go to a show or, you know, an agricultural show or a horse show, just have a look around the classes, just see what breeds are there, what breeds are represented, and, you know, go and ask some of the people that are keeping those breeds and just have an interest in it. You know, equine can be, like a lot of things, can be a bit of a bubble, and it's just good to get out of your bubble and just talk to people that are doing something maybe slightly different to you are. And I think that just raises awareness across the board then.
Tracy, Thank you for coming on Curious Equestrian. You're going to stick around and answer some listener questions in our members zone. So if you want to hear our Q&A, please join our special membership here at Curious Equestrian. But for now, Tracy, thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.